The air in cell block SE hung thick with the weight of stale silence. Inmates were accustomed to the hum of isolation, but that morning, something was different. Correctional Officer Kelly Monroe began her rounds just after 6 a.m., the jangle of keys echoing like gunshots through the stillness. When she reached cell C7, her steps faltered. A cold sense of dread curled in her stomach. Through the small, rectangular window, fogged with condensation, she glimpsed the unmistakable hue of orange, but not the standard-issue jumpsuit. This was different, deliberate. Inside, Leslie Ann Hachman, daughter of Hollywood legend Gene Hackman, swayed from a crude noose fashioned from a prison-issue shirt. The fabric stained a murky orange from the rust-tainted water of the facility's pipes, bit into her pale neck. Her toes hovered just above the ground, as though reluctant to surrender to the finality of death. There was no note, no final words, only silence. Hours later, that same silence exploded into a frenzy. News of her death ignited across social media and dominated news cycles, reigniting a case many thought was nearing its end. But for those who had followed the story from the beginning, from the deaths of Gene Hackman and his wife Betsy Arakoa, Leslie's demise wasn't simply a tragedy. It was a culmination, a final act in a twisted drama that had been months in the making. To understand the end, you must first understand what came before. The call came on a bitter Tuesday morning. Neighbors, concerned by the unusual stillness of the Hackman residence, had requested a welfare check. The officers arrived to find the front gate ajar. The desert wind had left tracks of dust on the pathway, and the mailbox overflowed with uncollected letters. Something was wrong. Inside, the air was heavy and undisturbed. The first officer described it as a silence that felt alive, as though the house itself bore witness to the tragedy. Gene Hackman, cinematic icon and two-time Academy Award winner, was found slumped in his favorite chair in the sunroom, a closed book resting in his lap. His wife, Betsy, lay beneath the covers in their bedroom, her body eerily still. There were no signs of forced entry, no struggle, no blood. At first glance, it seemed like a peaceful passing, but not everything was as it appeared. The official cause of death was initially attributed to natural causes. Gene's heart had grown weak in his final years, and Betsy's health had similarly declined. Yet small inconsistencies gnawed at the investigators. What were the medications that both had relied on? Why were there conflicting reports about when they were last seen alive? And why had Leslie's account of her final visit to her parents' home been contradicted by security footage? Leslie, the sole heir to a $30 million estate, quickly became a person of interest. She held power of attorney over her father's affairs. Just weeks before their deaths, she had attempted to revise his will, cutting out former beneficiaries. But was she merely a grieving daughter, or a woman consumed by greed? Leslie's arrest was swift. Charges of obstruction, fraud, and elder abuse loomed over her. The tabloids devoured the story, painting her as a cold-hearted manipulator. The headlines were ruthless. Black Widow heiress, the dark side of Hollywood legacy. Gene Hackman's final days, betrayed by blood. The $30 million motive. Pundits dissected every moment of Leslie's life. Former friends and distant relatives surfaced to offer grim anecdotes. Psychologists speculated about childhood resentment and fractured family ties. But the public trial had one glaring absence: hard evidence. The court proceedings dragged on, plagued by delays and speculation. Meanwhile, Leslie languished in a detention cell, awaiting the trial that could seal her fate. And then she was gone. The official report ruled Leslie's death a suicide. The fabric of her prison shirt had been woven into a crude noose. The guards on duty claimed they hadn't noticed any signs of distress, and the prison psychiatrist reported no indication of suicidal tendencies. Yet questions lingered. The security cameras? Malfunctioning. The guard? On an unscheduled break. The footage? Gone. Some called it coincidence. Others called it cover-up. Former FBI profiler Michael Denson spoke bluntly on a late-night news panel. When the primary suspect in a high-value estate fraud case dies under suspicious circumstances, you don't rule anything out. especially when that death conveniently prevents testimony. Even more unsettling were the letters. Sealed away until the deaths of Jean and Betsy were confirmed, the letters were meant to be private reflections, final words from a man who had spent a lifetime in the spotlight. But one letter stood out. In it, Jean had written, "If you're reading this, then I didn't have time to stop what was coming." What had he feared? Who or what was coming? Gene Hackman was a man who avoided scandal. Unlike his Hollywood peers, he shunned the limelight when cameras weren't rolling. His career had been built on roles that explored the frailty of human nature. Detectives, outlaws, broken men searching for redemption. Yet behind closed doors, Gene wrestled with demons of his own. Estranged from his daughter for years, their relationship was marked by resentment and half-hearted reconciliations. Some claimed he feared Leslie's influence. Others believed he suspected her of something far darker. And then there was the paranoia. Neighbors recalled how Gene had grown wary in his final months, speaking of unseen watchers and the feeling of being followed. He'd even considered hiring private security, but never followed through. Was it the early signs of dementia? Or was he truly in danger? Leslie's death didn't close the book on the Hackman case. If anything, it ripped the final chapter apart, leaving only fragments of truth. Had she acted alone in her parents' deaths? Or had she been a pawn in a larger scheme? Did she take her own life out of guilt and fear, or was she silenced to ensure her secrets died with her? The empty halls of the Hackman estate stand as a monument to unanswered questions. The sun still rises over the hills of Santa Fe, but the shadows remain. And in those shadows, the truth waits.